Welcome to this conversation with my friend, Steve Woodworth. Hi, I'm so glad you're joining me today, Steve.
Thank
For
you,
those of
Kristin. My
you,
pleasure.
yeah, mine as well. For those of you listening in, I first became a friend and a fan of Steve Woodworth when we were together a couple of years ago. We met at a conference of the Christian Leadership Alliance. We were in the CEO forum together. And Steve shared a little booklet that he developed called How Can Ministry Leaders Stay Faithful to Their Mission? And it relies heavily on wisdom from Dallas Willard. And I thought, this is a like-minded friend of mine. We're both fans of Dallas Willard, and now I'm a fan of Steve. So it's been a joy to meet Steve. And we followed that up with you guesting on our podcast, Mark Vincent and I, our Third Turn podcast, where you very honestly and humbly shared your own transition story that you're in the process of. And you used a term that I've just been so grateful for. You talked about phobic fears that can happen for you and for all of us in transition. I know that has been a blessing to many who have listened. And now I've been waiting with bated breath as you have been researching a new book. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So show us the book and tell us the title and what's up with all that, Steve.
The book is Lost in Transition: Lessons from the Most Disastrous and Successful Ministry Successions. The impetus for the book was just my own experience. I was at World Vision for 12 years and then left and joined this agency 30 years ago. And I have seen at least 100, maybe 200 successions of leaders. And I developed a conviction that about half of them go poorly. And I've talked to other people that have similar kinds of exposure to a lot of ministries as I do, and they agreed. And I mean, unprompted from me, they all guessed around half. And one well-known executive recruiter told me, and he said I would add that only about 25% are grand slams, where everything just goes great and the leader is the perfect fit. And the ones that go poorly often leave such damage, especially when the outgoing leader is hurt, which is one of the most common things that happens when they go badly. And then the outgoing leader, by being hurt, doesn't bring that goodwill to the organization, and donors leave, and it's just and it's to see them hurt. It's just sad. Two of the people I interviewed for the book were men in their 70s who were 5 to 10 years past having left their organizations. They had led the organizations for 20 plus years, and they had such bad experiences that in me interviewing them about what went wrong, they choked up telling me they were still that pained by the whole experience. So I talked to people on and off over the last few years, and more people told me you should write a book on that. And I had developed several principles that I thought were in place when things go well and were missed when things did not go well. And I was finally encouraged to make it a top priority to get that book done. So throughout 2023, I interviewed a lot of leaders, those coming and going, and boards and others to kind of test the principles and get real life stories to tell in the book to illustrate those principles.
Well, you've had a unique front row seat. Like you said, I know you're longstanding CEO leader of Masterworks, which is a communications agency in Seattle. You've worked with a lot of Christian ministries and Christian organizations. So you, more than most, have had a front row seat to see a lot of the good and the not so good. And I think it's a really unique thing to have. We can talk about transition and principles of transition and well done transitions and succession stories, but to have those personal stories of what happened is just a really unique vantage point that you're bringing in this. So I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on the copy as it gets released this week. Steve, what are the most important things that you learned and that you share in this book based on all the people you've talked to?
Well, I had four principles going into it that I thought were the keys, and then I added one as I went along. And so, do you want me to just go through those pretty quickly, and then you can
Great,
ask me any questions? Okay, one
please.
is that boards don't know enough to choose a CEO. They need help, and they don't realize it a lot of times. They know it's their most important job. The picking of a CEO is the number one responsibility of the board.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I think they feel responsible to that they should know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't consult enough with the senior staff, or if this outgoing CEO is successful, they know the job better than anybody and they should be included in the process. And the very best successions I've seen, the outgoing CEO is involved in the process of helping choose their own successor.
Mm-hmm.
And even more than that, the best ones of all are ones that they have somebody internally that they're grooming for that position. And then the boards and CEOs lean in together to figure out, is this really the right person? Are we sure? So that's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing, is that boards don't know what they don't know. They
Mm-hmm.
spend 7 days a year or 5 days a year thinking about the organization, and the senior staff spends 365 days a year thinking about the organization.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is the culture fit is absolutely crucial. And that's why I recommend strongly that organization thinking about succession groom internal candidates. Really, really good CEOs who have the best interests of the organization at heart for the long term. They hire, if they don't have somebody already, they hire someone they think could be their successor, and they groom them. And when that works, it solves the culture problem, because you've got a person that has been there and they fit the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, these days, a lot of CEOs of especially of larger ministries are coming from the corporate world. And Rich Stearns of World Vision says that coming from the corporate world to World Vision was like landing on Mars. He said
Mm-hmm.
everything was so totally different. I didn't even know where to start. I didn't understand what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the next thing I would say, is that culture fit is crucial. And so leaning toward hiring someone from within who already has absorbed the culture is a key predictor on how well the successions will go. Much higher success rate. Um, Respecting the outgoing leader is another critical factor. The outgoing leaders are going through one of the most emotionally charged times of their lives. You know
Yeah.
this from Maestro-level leaders, and you guys lead
Mm-hmm.
people through that, and hold their hand through the whole process. It's up and down. Sometimes, some days you wonder if I really do want to go, or am I doing this prematurely? What am I going to do next? Who will I be when I'm not the CEO of such and such, or the past lead pastor of such and such church? And so respecting the outgoing person is really critical, because that's what keeps their goodwill intact for the sake of the organization. The goodwill with major donors, with church members, with all the constituents of the organization. A good CEO has built personal friendships with a lot of the key constituents,
Mm-hmm.
and if they're respected and treated well, that goodwill will carry on, either in
Mm-hmm.
an emeritus role that's a formal thing, or just in the fact that the donors are going to come to the outgoing CEO and say, "Tell me why I should continue to support the organization." And that happened to me once. I wasn't sure about this new person. I was a much younger leader, and I was very personally invested in the outgoing leader. And I asked him, should I continue to support it? He gave me a impassioned, like 10-minute speech about how great this new person was, and why I should continue to support it. And so my wife and I continue to support. And if he had just simply said something lukewarm, he wouldn't have had to disparage the organization. He could have just said, well, you should just pray about it and see where the Lord's leading you. And well, that would have potentially meant we stopped giving. I don't know, but a lot of organizations lose a lot of major donors,
Yeah.
especially if the outgoing leader is unhappy. And then everybody has to have humility in this process. The incoming leader needs to avoid the temptation to think that this is now my day. I've got my own ideas. I'm going to make a lot of changes. And so, the outgoing leader's best out of my way, because that'll just slow me down. that blows up a lot of times in organizational transitions. The outgoing leader has to be humble enough to say, I had my time. God has a limited lifespan for me, as he does for all of us.
Mhm.
And he has a plan for generations of his work on earth, his kingdom spreading. And my time is going to come to an end, and I want to end well, and I want to work with the organization to make sure that everything goes smoothly and that I leave it better off than it is now. I leave it so that it flourishes in the years ahead. And all that takes a lot of humility.
Mhm.
Then the principle that I came up with as I was going through all this is I realized on all of the transitions that went really well, there was really clear, honest communication and short
Mm.
accounts. And I've discovered that on my own. I, I'm going through my own transition too. I've found my successor. I've been grooming him for a few years, and I'm sure he's the right person. But there were things where our values clashed. He was much more of a business, hard-nosed business guy than I am. And I felt like that was not a good fit with our culture. And and I knew it was upsetting other people. And so I would keep short accounts with them and say, you came into this meeting and said, everybody needs to work harder. People around here just don't know how to work hard. And your own senior team sitting in the room and me, your boss, all felt you're talking about us. And so you've got to be careful about saying things like that. And he appreciates that. He
Mm.
absorbs that. And he has given me permission over and over again. And I've said, are you tired of hearing me correct you on this one thing? Oh, no, 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 don't ever stop until I
Mm.
get it. So just clear, open communication with short accounts. I got upset at Brian a little while ago. I thought he was trying to figure out in a conversation he and I had with our attorney how he could break a contract. I thought that's where he was going. And later on in that evening, that started to really upset me. And it just grew in my mind as the evening wore on. I couldn't go to sleep. I was laying there thinking about, I've never been in a conversation in my career where we were thinking about breaking a contract. Maybe
Mm.
we could come and say, can we change this deal because it doesn't seem like it's working out well for one or both of us. But and then I woke up early the next morning, and then I called Brian in the morning and told him, I think that if I understood you right, this is what you're trying to do. And I couldn't sleep last night. And he said, no, he said, I guess I was sort of thinking about like, how could we restructure it? But I used bad words. I didn't mean to imply that I would actually break the contract unilaterally. And so I'm sorry. And I want you to know, Steve, that if you ever get upset again about something that I do, don't lose sleep. Call me at night. Call me at 10:30 at
Mm.
night. And but he said, hey, it is cool. We're having this conversation less than 24 hours after the incident. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad you didn't carry it any longer than that. But let's talk earlier than that so you don't have to lose any sleep if this ever happens again.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Steve, you between having a front row seat at having worked with so many organizations and leaders, and now being in your own transition and working out what you're hearing and what you're learning personally, you do really have such a unique vantage point and voice from which to share these
That,
principles.
that's one of the other things I thought of when I thought about writing the book, Kristin, was that it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true that being a CEO is a lonely job.
Mm.
And a lot of the CEOs of ministries don't have anybody they can talk to about the struggles they're having with their board. They can't really talk to their staff about that usually, or and so I've made friends with a lot of the clients that we work with where
Mhm.
they feel like I'm someone that's safe that they can talk to. I've seen a lot of things out there. I might have some good advice for them. So I become friends with them. And I was pretty convinced that people would trust me and talk to me. And I found much more than that. I found a real enthusiasm to address this issue
Mm.
because they've all seen it. They've all seen a number of successions go poorly, and they wanted every single person I asked to be interviewed agreed. And
Mm.
even at the end, Steve Sellers, the president and CEO of Crew, had told me early on, yeah, I'll be happy to help. And we were having such trouble scheduling it that I got right to the end where I had about 2 weeks left and I was going to have to forget it. And I told him, if we can't do this in the next 2 weeks, this is by email, but I said, if we can't schedule something in the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to be able to use your story. And I really wanted the story because Crew is a great success story. We
Mm.
went from the founder, Bill Bright,
Hmm.
to Steve Sellers, or Steve Douglas, who was the second CEO, to Steve Sellers, who was the third. Every one of those, I didn't know Bill Bright, but I knew Steve Douglas and I know Steve Sellers, and those successions all were not only good, but they're all friends. And I watched like Steve Douglas
Mm.
and Steve Sellers; they were very good friends, and I knew that Steve Sellers didn't even really want the job, so I wanted that story, and we made it happen. We got it in right at the end.
Wonderful. Well, so grateful that you, through your own experience and others' willingness, are offering this as bread for others because it is so needed. Like you said, it's transition is something that most of us only do once in a lifetime. We come to it needing to learn and needing to, yeah, learn as we go. And so I'm really grateful that you all are committed to passing that on. Steve, is there anything that most surprised you in the research you did?
Um, the first thing that comes to mind is that I was thinking about parachurch ministries. That's what my experience, that's what my organization works with.
Hmm.
And when I talked um, to Rich Stearns at World Vision, who I thought was a model succession, and I
Hmm.
got to the end of the interview and I felt like this really is a model. And I told him, I said, Rich, I think this could be a chapter in the book because you guys just seem to have done everything right. He
Mm.
was reeling off my principles and telling his story before I would say this is one of the principles.
Mm.
Early on, he said most boards are clueless, or something like that. And
Hmm.
I said, that's one of my, and he didn't want to phrase it that way in the book, but in the spur of the moment, that's one of the things that he said. And then he said, if you're going to use me as a model, you need to talk to my board chair and my succession committee chair and my successor, because they might all say I was just a pain in the rear and it didn't
Mm.
go anywhere near as well as I think it went. So I did. I said, okay, yeah, I'll talk to those people. He set it up so I could interview each of those people. And while
Mm.
talking to the board chair, a woman by the name of Joan Singleton, super smart. She came with notes, and she had confirmed all the things that Rich shared, and told me some more of the backstory from the board side. And then she said, you need to talk to my pastor because he retired last year and it was just as good of a transition.
Mm.
And he worked at it for 8 years with his successor.
Wow.
So you should talk to him. And I thought my first reaction was, I'm not writing about pastors, but I didn't want to disrespect her. So I said,
Mm.
okay, yeah. And so she hooked me up to talk to her pastor. Come to find out, this was a church of over 20,000 people that I hadn't heard of. And the guy's name is David Ashcraft. He's since been appointed the new CEO of the Global Leadership Network, which puts on the Global Leadership Summit every year that,
Hmm.
grew out of Willow Creek. He's a really smart guy, and he convinced me that I should broaden the book to include
Mm.
pastors because he said every one of those principles is the key to good senior pastor succession. And he said, I think in the church, we do it even worse than in the parachurch.
Mm.
So I did. I then decided to interview pastors and found that these principles did hold up with the pastors that I spoke to,
Wow.
which surprised me. I didn't intend to. And there
Hmm.
are other books out there on pastoral succession. There's a lot more content out there, but
Hmm.
this this process, the way I went about it, interviewing people and telling their stories, was is I think a unique angle to that.
Hmm. I agree. Um, so is there anything, I know, like we've said, you're in your own transition process. You're working alongside a named successor. You're, paralleling each other through these years. And you came into this research, Steve, it sounds like with some, a sense of some kind of principles or theories around some of the core principles. Was there anything that you listened to or learned that really underscored some new insights for yourself in your own journey? I know you're learning a lot in your own journey, but listening to other leaders did it shed light on anything fresh or anything new for you personally in your in your process?
Well, all the principles, I felt like many of the successions that go badly actually start well. The person is chosen, there's a honeymoon period, the person who's choosing their successor is grooming them into the job and making the case to the board that this is a serious candidate that we
Mm-hmm.
should consider. And then something goes wrong in the relationship. And I think
Mm,
often it's just that in the heat of the moment and the day to day, they just forget some of this stuff, and
mm,
they stop communicating openly, or they stop allowing other people to hold them accountable to be humble. And I think that I kept telling myself, and I still do, now the book is coming out, I better do this right, or I'm going to
mm,
lose all credibility to have a book that stands out, to help people through this.
mm,
So, but I think the thing that I realized that I hadn't really dealt with before was when some of the people who were already retired told me how hard it was for them and how much of a drag it was on their ego. That
mm,
when people say, "What do you do?" and you say, "Well, I'm the head of the such and such rescue mission," that is a core part of your identity. And when
mhm,
they say, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm retired," you feel like you're a nobody. So so a lot of them felt like they wished that they had put more investment into what they were going to do next.
mm,
And that's been key for me. I don't want to stop working for the Lord's kingdom. That's what our company does. We help build Christian organizations to be better and stronger and to flourish and to accomplish their missions. And so being very curious, even like what might come out of the book. I've had two people call me, and say, two CEOs, one I didn't know, one I did know, call me and say, "I hear you're writing a book on ministry leader successions. I'm at an impasse with my board. Would you be willing to get on a
mm,
call with me and my board chair?" And so there may be some of that. So I'm like trying to
mhm,
keep my radar open to that. Could be a cool thing if there are
mhm,
moments like that where I can talk to a board chair with a CEO and try to pick apart why are they struggling, and then share stories I know of how. Like, the corporate American model is that when you're done, you're done, and that's what pastors are taught in seminaries. And several pastors have said that they were taught in seminary that when you're done, you're done. You get out, and
mhm,
that's not the healthiest thing for an
mm,
organization or for
mhm,
a church, unless the pastor's going to move and go, live by their grandkids and not even be near the church anymore or something like that. uh, the um, the idea of being very deliberate about looking for opportunities and making plans for what I'm going to do as I wind down. He must increase, I must decrease, but as I decrease, I got to find something to fill
Yeah,
the gap.
great. Yeah, totally agree. I think so many transitions are complicated when leaders haven't done the work of preparing for the life to go to. It's just easy in the void to kind of get back involved and do things. Yeah, tend to get back in the mix in ways that aren't necessarily helpful. But yeah. So the title "Lost in Transition." You spoke earlier to the fact that, roughly half of transitions go poorly. As many as maybe 75 to 80% aren't done to be deemed successful or done really well. So lost in transition makes sense just from the statistics. Is there anything else, Steve, that title represents to you? And as you've researched this, what is lost in transition, or what does that title mean to you, having done this research?
The the um, the two things that stand out the most are the loss of the goodwill of the outgoing leader,
Mm,
resulting in lost donors, lost income. I've seen organizations that their income has dropped as much as 50% because the
mm,
outgoing leader is hurt and does not want to have anything to do with the organization. And
mhm,
I've found that the boards and the incoming leader justify that with the idea that, well, there's nothing we could have done about it. He or she was really good friends with those donors, and they were giving because of that, and we
Mm.
couldn't have kept them. And they don't realize that they could have kept them. So
Mhm.
they've lost a lot of value, and they've set the organization back years by not handling the outgoing leader really well.
Mhm.
I think that there's other losses too, the like the loss of identity for the outgoing leader. And
Mm.
so I just felt like there's a lot of loss. I have to give credit to one of my creative directors for coming up with the title, the clever title. And even in some of our own documentation, occasionally it gets written down as lost in translation. But I think that from the time I first heard the title, in fact, there were a group of maybe 5 of us, and when Jeff, one of our creative directors, suggested "Lost in Transition," everybody said, "That's it. It's easy to remember, and it's a clever twist on a familiar phrase."
Mhm. And very indicative of so much loss,
Yeah,
loss for the leader, but
yeah,
inadvertent loss for the organization, where
yeah.
we, at Maestro-level leaders talk about setting the organization and the successor up to thrive. Without being intentional about that, there's so much loss that can happen. So yeah, the title is very apropos.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's a lot of loss too in terms of the joy of having led the organization
hmm,
when you don't feel good at the end of the
yeah.
transition. It's you've lost a sense of your meaning and your life purpose when you feel that the organization has been taken from you, or like you haven't been treated well, or when your own pride has taken over and made you feel
Mhm.
ill will toward the organization. You've lost a lot too in terms of the outgoing leaders.
Totally agree. Well, I can't, like I said, cannot wait to get my hands on the copy and hear not only these principles, but personal stories to kind of underscore the highs and the lows, Steve. I know the book is set to release this Friday, which is March 29th. And I'll put links to order that. And but as we wrap up, final question, is there any kind of parting thought you'd share, anything you'd reiterate that we didn't cover that you'd want people listening to take away from this conversation and this work you've done?
I conclude the book by talking about how we all want to hear "Well done, good and faithful servant" when our
Mhm.
lives are over.
Mm,
And that's the context really that frames this, all of this is being stewards of what we have. That even if we started the organization, even if it's a for-profit, we don't own it.
mhm,
I had the privilege of meeting David Green, the founder of Hobby Lobby, early in the process, actually before I started the book. And he talked about how his own mental process went of thinking about the fact that there was no way that he could have built Hobby Lobby into this multi-billion-dollar business. It was all God, and
mm,
it wasn't his, and it wasn't. He said, not only did I decide that I needed to give it away, but I decided that I didn't even have a choice. Should I give it away or shouldn't I give it away?
mm,
What my only course of action as a Christian reasonably is to say, Lord, what do you want me to do with it? And because it's his. And
mm,
so I feel that, is, if that's true of Hobby Lobby, a big corporation, it's certainly true of ministries that are changing people's lives, that it's God that changes lives. It's not us. And so if he's put us in a position to lead an organization that does change people's lives, then how much more so is it his organization, and we need to do with it what he wants us to do, and not cling to it, and not feel like we're the answer to everything forever, because we're all gonna go to the same place. It's nobody
mhm.
gets out of here alive.
Right. Right. And by the um, benefits of your book, your research, and the work we both share and are passionate about, Steve, may there be ever more faith-based leaders who do this well and become models and beacons of what it means to do it well and stewarding our transition and succession well. So thank you so
Amen.
much for being here today. Really grateful for this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.